Well, I'm going to hit somewhere in the middle, I bet, in the end. So thank you for that. So let's get started tonight with the next slide. I'm going to share a little bit of experience, background statistics on where we are at as a nation. Then we're going to get into why you compost or different strategies or reasons why people compost. Then we're going to go in and get in the nitty gritty. How do you be successful in your backyard compost? So when we look at the statistics around the country, EPA, this is a graphic that I really like to show. Pretty much food is the biggest component of landfills across the country, according to most recent reports. We have a problem with that. There's an opportunity to divert that into something that's smarter. In Wisconsin, we did a waste characterization study, and a lot of states do these types of studies. So if you're not in Wisconsin and you're in another state, your state might have also done something like a waste characterization study. Our last one done in Wisconsin was in 2020, and they pretty much are grabbing a complete sample, literally grabbing a sample out of the landfill and sorting it. We sampled 14 landfills across our state. We had almost 400 samples that were hand sorted, plus another 659 that were visually inspected. They were hand sorted into 85 different components in 8 waste categories. And again, this graphic is showing the same results, actually even more than what we saw nationwide as a nation. So Wisconsin's got to, we've got to kick it up a little bit. Breaking that down a little bit more, we had wasted food formerly edible. So that's what was really shocking with this study, was edible food, and we just couldn't get the systems in place to get this edible food to systems where it could get to processing. So there's a breakdown somehow in that procurement of the food. But number 3 is where we're going to really be focusing today, food scraps. We don't all need to be putting food scraps right in the landfill. In fact, it's quite inefficient, and that is valuable material. So by the end of this presentation, I really hope you look at your food scraps as a resource, and you don't waste it in the landfill. It is so valuable to us, but we need to learn how to turn that biology into something useful to us. So when you approach compost in your backyard, really think about why you're doing it. So there are so many different levels of compost. As we look on this graphic from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, they mimic what's called the waste hierarchy. It's sort of our waste management hierarchical layout of how we look at prioritizing food, prioritizing waste management. Well, Institute for Local Self-Reliance took that concept and put it into how do we reduce food waste and grow community. So at the top, just like the waste hierarchy we use, we have source reduction, reduce as much as possible and reuse as much as possible are these top 2 tiers. So resource reduction, only produce what we're going to be utilizing or can utilizing in our system. And then before things go to waste, get it into food rescue, get it to people in time before it goes bad. Can we get it to even animals and agriculture to feed animals if it can't be used to feed folks? And then look at the third one. Home composting is the next tier of efficiency for how we manage waste. So if everybody handled their food waste on site, we would really be in a much better situation with our landfills. But look at all of these reasons, and this is just a sample of all the reasons why you'd want to compost. And depending what your end goal is, will determine sort of the method you use for composting. I'll explain that a little bit later when we get into it. It should make a little bit more sense as we go. All right. Few more stats. If you're wondering how much waste or food waste you produce per household, there was a study done. Again, this was from Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They wanted to know that. They wanted to know per household on average, how much are people producing? The results were 23 to 83 pounds, which sounds like, wow, well, they didn't really narrow that down, did they? Well, there's such a variance in household, what we term household. How many people are living in that house? How do they prep food? What is their culture? What do they garden or do they not? Do they process their own food and canning? You're going to have huge variance in that. But on average, I encourage you, if you want to know your poundage coming out of your house, weigh your food scraps that are coming out of the house. It'll help you right size your compost bin for your situation. So we're just going to create an average. On average, each household is producing approximately 50 pounds per month. That becomes quite significant when we look at waste reduction as a community. 600 pounds per year are coming out of a household that could be diverted through home composting. That's impressive, if you ask me, but maybe you're not so impressed. I don't know. So what is compost? Compost is one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm a biologist background. Biology and chemistry was my major in college, and I have been composting for 20, 30 years now. I don't know, as long as I possibly could. It's not dirt that we're talking about. It really isn't even soil. What we're actually doing with compost is we're adding a higher capacity of the soil to handle moisture and hold the nutrients that is going to be really important for our plants that we put in there to uptake that much easier. It's an easier medium for plants that we're trying to grow. So that's really what compost is. How do we create it? What you're going to do in your backyard compost is really mimic what nature is already doing. We are looking at, she's decomposing so many things all the time. We're trying to mimic that process that occurs naturally in nature, and we're trying to expedite it, if you will, in some cases, depending how quickly you want that compost in the end. Some people are like, I just want to divert food waste. Well, then you're not going to work as hard to get the finished compost, and that's fine. You're probably like about 80% of the people in the world, that backyard compost. Many people don't want to, they're just like, kind of like, I want to put food scraps away, and then maybe I'll get some compost. That's fine. But then there's a few, like 20% of us that are like crazy composts crusaders, and we really want that finished compost within 6 weeks to 3 months, maybe. I'm more on this every 6 months. I sort of want my finished compost. So I've slowed down through the years, I guess. What we're doing is we're adding things. So we're adding grass clippings, food scraps, and leaves. And we're going to put it in a place where where microorganisms can thrive. And then my compost, this is a garden from last year, and it was a perfect timing because we had very, very little rain in Wisconsin. It was almost a drought year. And my garden, I put this fresh compost on there, and it's really light in color because I have chickens. And so a lot of my compost was made from chicken bedding and waste that is lighter in color. My bedding was shaved pine and hardwood that I use for my bedding. So it's much lighter in color. Most of the time people will get this black rich soil amendment coming out of their compost. But yours could look a little different, and it depends what you put into it. But at the end of the summer, my garden was a forest. There was so much good soil holding or water holding capacity in the compost I added. Plus it was very nutrient rich. So my plants, despite the fact that it was really a drought year, I was so excited to see the results of this. I have 2 gardens. One had this compost on it, and it was like a forest of wonderful, wonderful produce. In my other garden, I really had to work hard to keep it watered. You know, the plants didn't thrive as well. They didn't have that fresh compost on there with real rich nutrients. So I'm an advocate. I'm even bigger advocate than I was when I started this craziness. There's many different ways to compost. What's popping up around the nation is pickup services that you might be seeing. That's another way you can support composting. If you dive into this whole backyard composting thing and it doesn't work, look locally for maybe a organics hauler. If you live in an apartment or something like that, you can use worm composting, and it is mimicking nature's process within a smaller container inside your house using red wigglers, pretty high efficiency organisms that break down material quickly. Our focus today is going to be on backyard composting for that. Okay. So let's get started on how does this whole process even work? Your key to composting is thinking about you're trying to keep an organism alive. Your organisms that you're keeping alive, you really can't even see, but there's millions, even billions of them in your backyard compost. These are the guys that you want to keep happy. And we're not going to be able to see them, but you'll know that they're there, and you know that they're doing work for you when you see the results of your compost. So like anybody else, any living thing, think about the 4 things we all need, all organisms in the world need to survive. Okay. That's going to be water. It's going to be oxygen. It's going to be some type of food source, and it's going to be some type of shelter or a home. This is the exact thing that these little fungi, bacteria, and excitomites also need to stay alive. So that's what you're doing. You're creating this incredible, wonderful environment that's going to allow these microbials to just thrive in the environment. The more they thrive, the more they're going to do work for you. You need these 4 components to make that happen. All right, so we're going to break that down into each of those components. We've got first water. How much water? We get this question a lot. How much water do we need in a compost? Well, you could probably find a moisture test that you could make. You could find probably a probe that will tell you. But generally speaking, if you feel comfortable enough, or if you want to use a garden glove, grab sort of the center of your compost and then just squeeze it. Droplets should form on the outside of your hand, and that will indicate, yeah, your moisture level is about 50%. It's good. If it's dripping like you're just eating a good old juicy watermelon in the middle of the summer, your moisture content's getting a little too wet. You're going to have to do something to dry that out, whether you're adding some material to it to kind of absorb some of that, or leave your bin, the lid off your bin if you have a lid on it on a nice sunny day, just to dry that out. If it's wet or if it's too dry, yes, I literally will take a hose to my compost in the middle of August when it's very dry, and I'll actually water my compost. Again, I need to keep these organisms alive. They need water to thrive. If my compost is dry, there's going to be no organisms really decomposing for me. So I actually will water my compost. Okay, oxygen levels. Now, there's microbials that favor all sorts of environments. We want the microbials that are anaerobic or are aerobic decomposers. They love oxygen. They work really fast for us. And this is the nature smell you smell after like a nice rain. It smells nice. These microbials actually give this nice earthy smell to it. If you end up with anaerobic environment, you will know it. And it's happened to me. It doesn't mean you've broken your compost or like you can't fix it. All you've done is created this environment where anaerobic decomposers are thriving, and they don't really thrive because they don't actually do a fast work like our aerobic decomposers. Anaerobic decomposers are quite slow. They are thriving more in an environment with less oxygen, and they produce a sulfur or a really foul kind of smell to your compost. So when your compost, if it were to go anaerobic on you, all you need to do is add some oxygen. Then you're going to favor aerobic and decomposers, and it's going to get back to work for you. Okay. So it may happen that your compost does start to smell. just adjust it, just do a little bit something. And most of the time it's breaking it up, adding water to your compost bin is usually the troubleshooting things we'll encounter. A lot of people are scared because they're worried that it's going to just stink too much. It's, there's lots of best practices you'll learn, I hope, at the end of this presentation to really troubleshoot some of those and be successful. That's one of them, the oxygen level. When we get into food, there's two types of food you'll hear composters talk about. There's food that's green and food that's brown. It's really the nitrogen that you're incorporating, and that nitrogen is coming through food and kind of fresh material. It's also, people ask coffee grounds. Coffee grounds is actually a green, even though it's so black, it looks like it's going to be this brown material, but it needs to be treated more like that fresh material. The other type of food we get into is carbon sources, and these are going to be your brown material. So green and browns, you need a nice mix of both of these in order to create the environment where these microbials will really thrive for you. Browns add water holding capacity to it. It adds texture. It allows oxygen to be a nice balance in your compost. So browns are super important for your compost bin. In fact, you need about equal to weight browns to greens. Now your greens or your nitrogen sources are really typically heavy and wet. They weigh more, they're denser. Where for browns, they are very light, they're dry. You need almost 2 to 3 parts in volume to get equal weights for the two materials, if that makes sense. So you need equal weights if you're a weight person, if you think in your statistics in weight to weight, or you can think 2 to 3 parts of brown material for every 1 part of green material. What that means, when you go from your kitchen, you take your kitchen materials, your food scraps out to your compost bin. You're going to dump that on your compost bin. Now you're going to add that fresh layer of browns on top. So you need a source sort of available. Make sure leaves are going to be your best, freest source of material for your browns. You can also use straw, hay. If you have access to sawdust, that works fine for a brown material. Sometimes I have to buy a hay bale or a straw bale, and really it doesn't matter too much if it's straw or hay. You could ask some composters and they'll say definitely not hay because there's a lot of seeds in hay. I don't mind that, and hay is cheaper. So, and sometimes that's what you have available. Sometimes you don't even have the option, hay or straw. You just go to see what is available there. Straw is really nice too, and it doesn't come with the seeds, but it is a little bit more expensive to have. So again, leaves are free and your neighbors would probably give you some. So stockpile your leaves is going to be your best bet. Backup sources are straw, hay, sawdust. If you have access to some sawdust works well too. What are some things we don't want to compost? A lot of people get worried about backyard composting because they're like, I'm just so scared I'm going to, have too many bad bacteria in there. And yes, it is very true. You could attract some critters a little bit more if you put the wrong things in there. You could also create some bad bacteria or E. coli that comes in there. And so let's talk about those a little bit. Meat, bones, fat, dairy, and oil sort of kind of encompass the same type of problems that exist. A little bit of meat, especially if it's cooked meat, just left over from your dinner, is not a big deal in a backyard compost, as long as you have enough material for it to break down. For me, I do not worry too much about just a little bit here and there. A little oil on my salad that maybe was left over from dinner. That's fine in my compost bin. It doesn't bother me, but I am going to be a little bit more conscientious if I'm putting little bits of some of these items in my compost bin, I'm going to make sure I'm covering it very well with some brown material when I put it in the compost, because it it may smell and attract some critters that I don't want to be coming into my compost bin. And I do want to start that decomposition process as fast as possible. So I want to start getting that mixed in so it starts breaking down quicker. I don't want it sitting around too long for that. Whole branches and logs, simply they just don't break down. They're just too dense. A backyard compost is not going to decompose these whole branches or logs. You're gonna have to break those down into smaller pieces. Dog and human waste, dog, cat, human waste. Yes, it can go in your backyard compost, but you need to be a lot more savvy with your compost to do this. And we advise against putting it on anything that's going to be food intake. So this would not, I don't advise to put it on a food garden at all if you're putting dog, cat, or human waste into your compost. You also need to be really sure you can get those temperatures up in your compost bin to break that down a little more. Now, for those of us that actually want to use the compost to collect the pet waste in the yard, it can be quite effective if you're just going to keep one compost bin sort of set aside for that, and it's going to be only put on non-ingesting type of food source. So it's going to be like on your flower beds or something like that. That's going to be kind of, you'll be fine with that. But that's why dog, cat, human waste is on here. You really have to know a little bit, be a little bit more comfortable and know those temperatures that your compost bin is putting on, and you're not going to use it on a food source. Charcoal is on this list, and even treated wood, mostly because they have additional chemicals that are in there that are released during the breakdown process and decomposition process. So unless you know what's in your charcoal, then I would advise just keep it out of your backyard compost bin. If you know it is pure and it was just no additives to it, then fine. But most of the time we don't, and there's usually some type of fire starter or something in a charcoal. Treated wood also, it doesn't really break down great. It's designed so it doesn't, and there's chemicals added to that, and so not advised for that. Some people might use treated wood to make their compost bin, and that comes down to your comfort level with that. It's fine. Some people really want to keep more of that organic side and decrease any possible exposure. Well, then don't use a treated wood for it. Use wood pallets or something like that, that you wouldn't have those precautions to worry about. Persistent weeds. I've learned this through the years very, very quickly. And I probably have spread my creeping Charlie all over my yard at this point because it just loves my yard. But persistent weeds, you can actually, in the state of Wisconsin, I know those can go, nuisance, invasive plants can actually be bagged up and put into the landfill. So you're just trying to stop the spread of those nuisance alien plants like that. So those persistent weeds, try to keep it out of your compost bin as well, especially if you know your temperatures aren't going to get hot enough to kill the germination potential of those weeds. We're going to talk about temperature in a little bit, so we'll get into that in just a bit. All right, I do want to just add bedding and manure. We get a lot of questions about, can I put manure in my compost? Actually, it's great. If you know someone with a horse or cow, excellent source for compost to help heat up your compost bin. Chickens, backyard chickens. This is actually one of my hens that I had for a while, and I really loved my backyard hens for my compost more than, I mean, the eggs were great too, folks. Don't get me wrong, but they were amazing for I gave them the food scraps, they ate everything, and then they gave me this great manure, and that was wonderful on my compost. It was really good. The pet manure really allows us to get that pile up to 140 and to 160 degrees. That's really your target if you possibly can. This is not an easy feat for a backyard compost, but it is possible. And it's important to keep both your nitrogen and carbon balanced. One other mistake I did when I first got chickens is I was like, oh, there's bedding in my chicken coop. So I'm just going to clean out my chicken coop because that's all brown material. And I added really nothing else. Well, it stunk very quickly. I'm sure the neighbors were like, what is going on? And why do we smell like or why does it smell like we live right next to a pig farm? I called a friend and she immediately said, break it apart. Your compost has gone anaerobic and you need to break it apart so you do not have those microbials thriving in that oxygen kind of environment. There was way too much manure mixed in with that bedding. I needed to treat it with a lot more, adding some carbon material when I added that manure in. So something to think about when you're doing your compost. So let's talk about the shelter we're going to make for these microbials. Compost is happening in this pile. We might all look at this. If you had your neighbor that was kind of like this, it's probably not going to make your neighbors happy. This is wide open for pests and rodents to come on in and enjoy this food pile. Composting is happening, but it's not recommended to keep it like this. So we're going to go ahead and build a nice environment where these microbials can really thrive. Again, we're trying to keep them alive. We're favoring those positive aerobic decomposers, excuse me, and we want them to thrive. So creating an environment where they can is very important. There are many, many samples out there. You can make your own. Part of my backyard compost is our pallets now. They're free and they hold all my browns. So I have about 2 of these that are filled with leaves throughout the, really in the fall. A 2 and 3 bin system, if you're going to get serious about composting, is what you want to target. If you're going to have a lot of material and you want to actually get that processing going, you'll need at least 2, ideally 3 bins. 1 works fine for those of us that are kind of passive, cold composters that really don't need that finished product right away. Purchasing a bin has yielded higher success in our experience with backyard composters. People like having this place where it's nice and a little bit more tidy, easier to manage. But a lot of those compost bins out there are either cone shaped, which we find to be problematic trying to turn it. And even lifting that cone off can be really difficult when it's full and packed with a lot of material. We sell this home composter, and some of you on this call might be community partners with us. And we really have tested so many, probably 30 different compost bins out there. This one's the best. We love this one for the backyard composter. The average backyard composter, it's excellent. There's no moving parts in it, and it's made of 100% recycled product. It's made all black, which is a great absorbent as well. This I'm forgetting the name of it. This is a nice one too, but it's mostly for holding brown material. It's a little more flimsy, but it's great complement to this. And this is a tumbler system. If you're in a real, you see these more in urban environments, they tend to be smaller. They tend to be, I don't know, they're more expensive. So, you know, if you can afford something like this. It also has more moving parts. It's not tied to the earth where you're getting the free microbials to come into the environment. So you have to like pay attention. You have to add maybe a scoop of soil into it so you're getting some microbials that are going to break that down. Otherwise, your only other decomposers that have access to this is maybe a fly or fruit flies to get in here. They create a lot of maggots if you're not turning this enough. And so those are your decomposers, not really ones we are really excited about encountering. Not that you don't see fruit flies in the middle of the hot summers in some of these, but in these areas, you don't have other microbials doing the work for you. So you need to pay attention to that more. We don't advise it because they're expensive. They have more moving parts that break, and they're not tied to the earth. But they can work really well for you to keep vermins out and collect smaller garden material if you live in a real urban environment there. People always ask, is it placed in shade or sun? And I'm here to tell you it really doesn't matter. If you put it in a sunny spot, you'll need to water it more. If you put it in a shady spot, it's going to hold moisture longer. And so you just really have to pay attention to moisture level in there, but either spot works fine. Think about how close you are to the neighbors. Think about how much there is access to it. If you're in a winter environment, in the dead of the winter, how far do you really want to walk? You going out to that back 40 and like trekking all the way back there to take your food scraps out? If you are, you're likely not going to participate in your backyard composting as much or food scrap diversion because it's just not accessible. So think about that placement. If you have a garden, place it near the garden. If it's by a building, give yourself a little bit of buffer from a building or fences, just so you're not right up against either one. For that, the fences can degrade. A lot of them are made of wood as well, and you're putting decomposers right next to a wooden fence. So be conscious about that. Having it near a water source is great. And then thinking about the drainage for that. At the bottom, when I'm preparing my compost bin, I'll often put sticks or some kind of small sticks on the bottom so I can have that air that's constantly in the bottom of it. And then I'm adding my greens on top and layering that back and forth with my browns. The lasagna layering is the most common way of backyard composting. So every time you're adding a green, you're adding 2 to 3 parts of browns on top. We talked about that balance of greens and browns earlier, getting that carbon and nitrogen mix really well. So you'll want to be, as you're adding fresh material, this is what you're doing. When you're kind of full, this is where you break it apart and really mix it all up, and then get the components all kind of mixed together. And then you can cure it in the final stage of compost, where the compost will sort of sit for 3 weeks to 6 weeks before you actually get it usable for your compost or on your garden. So let's dig into that a little bit. I've been talking about this cold composting, which a lot of you will be doing. This is what my father does. This is what some of my siblings do as well. They put materials in, they layer it, and they really leave it. They're not going to break that down. They're not going to really turn it with a pitchfork, and it's fine. You will get decomposition and compost this way. The nice thing about these bins is there's oftentimes a little door that's on the front. Finished compost actually will congregate over time. It takes about a year for that compost to sort of have its final stage at the bottom of your bin, but you do have it, so you have it for around your flower beds or something like that. And these, you don't have to do anything. You know, the microbials, as long as that environment's really the right moisture level and there's some air in there, decomposition will happen. So the other thing that won't happen very much in a cold compost is you're going to have persistent weeds that never really get, or the compost bin won't get hot enough to stop those seeds from germinating. You'll probably only get it to about 100 to 110 degrees. And it's not enough to kill like a tomato seed plant or some of our persistent weeds. They won't die off at 100, 110 degrees. So just keep that in mind. That finished compost might still have some germination capacity of the things that are mixed in with that soil amendment. But it's still creating compost. It still has high nutrients. You'll see it. It's black. It smells earthy. But it might still have some seeds in there. Hot composting is where you're a lot more active. These are the people that are like compost crusaders who really want that finished product. If you are this type of person, or if you're really excited about getting into backyard composting, think about as we go into these spring and summer months, you'll want to turn your pile every 5 to 7 days. There's a few reasons to do this. First of all, you're paying attention to the moisture level. You're looking at your compost. You're thinking about your balance of browns and greens. By turning it once a week, you're going to be assessing that every week. You're going to be adding water if you need water. You're going to leave the lid off on a sunny day if we're going to have some sunny days and it's just too wet. So you're really going to be monitoring this. You're going to have finished compost if you're real good at it in 6 weeks. I've never been that good. But generally by 6 months, you have some nice finished compost ready to use. And that's my method. I'm in the spring here. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to be taking all of my the compost that I just mixed before in the fall. I mixed it all up, left a big pile, covered it with a brown material, and it's just been sort of curing for a good 6 months. Now that's going to go on my gardens in probably this weekend actually. And then it's going to sit for about a week or two before we get into any gardening and planting there. The other thing with hot active compost, you can buy a thermometer, compost thermometer at any garden center, and it will help you take the temperature to know where your compost is at. For at least 3 days, you want your compost to get to 130 to 160 degrees. And your pile, if it reaches 150 for 3 days, you know it's going to prevent most of those seeds from germinating. If it only gets to 130, 140, you're still good. For backyard compost, that's actually really good. If you hit 130, 140, that's kind of your target. If it does hit that 150, you know you've killed off most of those seeds. But even at 130, 140, you're going to get a lot of them that just will kind of squash that capacity for them to sprout. And that's what you're wanting to get, so you're not spreading spreading weeds throughout. Your finished compost. So in this picture is a really good illustration. This is why you have 3 bins, because you want to add, one bin has some fresh material, and this is what we're adding material on. It's always going to get the fresh material. When this gets full, they're going to cap it, which means they mix it real well, and they're going to layer it with a nice brown layer. And that's what going to be your first hot temperatures of that 3 to 5 days. You get these really excited microbials that love heat environment, and they work fast. They're amazing. And then all of a sudden you'll see the temperature like start to go down and kind of level off at about 110, 120 maybe. And that's where you know you're in a curing stage. So you hit that temperature for 3 days or so, and then all of a sudden you're going to notice that temperature going down, and that's fine. That's totally normal. You have those hot, loving microbials that are sort of dying off is what's happening biologically. And now you're starting to favor sort of those, that medium level, medium thermophilic microbials that are going to stay pretty active for another 3 weeks or so, keeping your pile cooking and curing, or really cooking, I should say. We're in a cooking stage, not quite curing yet, for a good 3, maybe 6 weeks. And then this pile is almost finished compost or curing. So it's just going through a sit stage before you actually use it. And that would be depending how quickly you want compost, that will be just when you're ready to use it. So a couple weeks, maybe, maybe not even that much, depending on your use. It's gonna, you'll determine that for how you need it. So, all right, a few troubleshooting. Let's say you smell something rotten. What you'll want to do is break that apart and get some browns in there. You just have too much, you probably have just too many brown materials in there. If it gets to this, you're starting to favor those anaerobic microbials, and they're going to stink. So they at least tell us, they give us a really good indication when something's not right. Same thing with an ammonia smell. If you smell that, you just have too many greens. What you need to do is just add more browns and start turning that pile, or break it apart if you need. So that's the easiest things. If your temperatures are too low, then you just don't have enough material. You need to get your pile bigger. Maybe it's water content. Take a look at that. If it's just you're not getting that temperature up, usually what that means for my compost bin is I don't have enough material. I need to see if a friend has some manure that really is helpful. Or if I could just get some more material, make a bigger pile. My pile is too hot, like, really too hot, which usually doesn't happen in backyard composting. But if that does, then you just don't have enough ventilation. It's just too big. You need to reduce your pile a little bit. Again, that is a lot less common in the backyard compost. Okay. This last mention on temperatures is composting takes place at 80 to 130 degrees. Hot composting for those 3 days or so is at 130 to 160. And if a pile reaches over 150 for 3 days straight, it will do a fabulous, amazing job of preventing any sprouting of seeds. About animals, we get a lot of questions, especially with more increased people engaging in backyard composting, living in very urban environments where rats are a serious issue. A few different things you can do. Tumblers work in an environment like that. Remember, you're not going to have a big holding capacity in those tumbler systems that are detached from the earth, but that's one. Our advice is to put some chicken wire that wraps on the bottom of your bin. So you still have attachment to the natural microbials that are coming up from the earth to do the work for you. And you're just creating those, those organisms from getting into the bin itself. So those are some things you can think of. And anytime you add fresh material, make sure you're putting some brown material on top, and that's going to stop the odors from getting out there and those little guys getting in, coming to your compost and being attracted to that. A minute video I'll show here on how to prepare your compost for winter. And I'm just going to play this real quick. Again, it's just in a minute clip on that.
I'm in the middle of changing my compost bins.
You should be able to hear that okay.
What I first do is empty my 2 black compost bins, and I combine them into a large pile. This, you could see my pizza boxes are in there, eggshells, kind of the raw material still. Those will all get broken down. They're going to have a good 6 months or more of sitting. And then I have the compost bin. This compost bin has been emptied. This is where I'm adding fresh material for the fall. All my fresh materials will go down into there. And then I have 2 kind of wire cages. These are going to be filled with leaves, and this is how I collect my leaves for the winter. And then I have a second bin. This is going to be assembled, and it's going to be completely empty as I go into winter. And during winter, I'll have 1 full bin that can collect material all winter long. It won't break down very much, but it's an empty bin, and it's plenty of capacity for doing what I need.
Okay, so that just kind of showcases a little bit in the back of how to get your compost prepared. I now have a 2 bin pallet system to hold those leaves instead of those wire cages. So I've upgraded a little in the last couple of years. A little bit more about that compost bin. Some of you already have access to it because your community sells it, but there are other bins out there. We just really like this one. There's also kitchen catchers that we do sell. You will have to think about how to collect your food scraps in the kitchen. And, we have this one. We really like stainless steel, although an ice cream pail will work. Your absorbent of smells happens really quick in that plastic. So anytime you have a plastic or anything like that, then it's going to hold those smells in your kitchen, and you're going to get less participation. We really like stainless steel. It cleans great. It's durable. That lasts forever. Dishwasher safe. Ours is about a gallon holding capacity. It can be purchased online if you want, or look locally for for a kind of a stainless steel is what we recommend. I also like those that are ceramic. Again, glass, something that has a really good solid surface that doesn't absorb any type of smells or nuisance that way. If you're interested where to get the bins, these are the communities around the country of where they have participated in the compost bin. You could reach out if you live in those areas. In Minnesota, you're going to contact the Recycler Association of Minnesota for any of those. There's a few communities in Illinois, 2 in New Jersey, about 3 or 4 in Wyoming, Wisconsin as well. Iowa's on here. I forgot to put Iowa on. There's a few communities in Iowa as well. If you're interested, just kind of reach out to us and we can get you connected. And with that, I say happy Earth Day to you all. I'll pause it and take any questions that you might have. You seeing that it's sort of a smaller group, you're happy. You can definitely just unmute and ask your questions, and I'm happy to field any of those that you might have at this moment. You could use the chat too if you don't want to come off mute.